Okay, all right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. This leads on really nicely from Jen's talk that we've just had about using Gen AI and students kind of providing their sort of getting their own feedback. So I hope this kind of continues the discussion really nicely. I'm going to talk about educators' use of potential use or use of Gen AI in assessment feedback, and the kind of the paradox that we found in our research. So my name's Louise Taylor. I'm a professor of education and student experience at Oxford Brookes University, and we did this work as part of a project team. I want to acknowledge it's very much a team effort, so acknowledge Zoe, Gary, Sarah, and Natalie, who all contributed to this research. So we know that feedback is fundamental to student learning, as we've just heard and we've been hearing this morning, but it's also one of the most problematic elements. We know that student satisfaction with it on things like NSS scores, it's typically low. It's also quite an exhausting part of the role for educators. So we talk about marking marathons where we have hundreds of scripts that we're marking kind of day in and day out. So there's challenges both for educators and students in providing and receiving good quality feedback that's actually going to support students to improve their learning. So we've also been hearing this morning about from Rebecca about how Gen AI can be used more generally by students to support things like their metacognition. But we know that adopting Gen AI certainly is contentious. There are ethical issues around it, environmental issues around it. But that said, it's here and it's here to stay. So we wondered really whether the question we looked at in our study was whether Gen AI could be a useful tool for helping students to get timely, supportive feedback to improve on their work qualitatively. It's a bit like the research we've just heard about. And really, what do students and potentially staff think? So the study I'm going to share with you is focusing on student perceptions, but the staff bit is I just want to quickly ask the audience, whether you're using Gen AI as a potential feedback tool, and we've already heard from Jen and Jenny that you are, but would anyone else like to say if they're using it yet or thinking about using it in terms of a way of helping students get feedback on their written work? You can either just put your hand up or put something in the chat. I've just seen your comment, Katie.
Yeah,
sorry, five scripts and a bit of chocolate.
We are looking at using it in our year one of our first kind of classes. Like they get kind of iterative feedback using AI, but they also get a member of staff as well.
Yeah. Okay. Phil, I've just seen you're using AI a little to help write comments based on the human written comments. Oh, okay, I see. So you take all the comments that the tutor's written and then kind of feed them all into AI and try and like create that summary.
Yeah,
Okay,
we would always review it as the humans after, but just if we've got 500 comments written by the human, the person, the marker, whatever you want to call them, and then you've reviewed them yourself. AI can also run. We use AI sometimes to run a sort of a fail-safe to check there's not something we've missed in the general comments.
Okay, all right, interesting. Thank you. Okay, thank you for people sharing. Carry on putting in the chat. Yeah, it'd be interesting to have a look at who's thinking about experimenting with it, etc. So I'll move on to tell you a bit more about the research now. So we used an opportunistic sample really to conduct some focus groups and or interviews with students. They were largely psychology students, and all the students were studying at UK universities, but Zoe and Gary are actually based in Dubai. So some of the students were based in Dubai and some of them were in England. Originally, we were looking at cultural differences, but There were some subtle differences between what the students were saying in the two cultural contexts, but actually we felt that there were more universal shared themes and perspectives from students than there were differences. So here I'm just going to focus on the similarities. And then really importantly, we had an independent researcher, Natalie, who led the discussion groups with students. She was not involved in any way in teaching the students, so we felt that the students should be able to be more open and honest, and they knew that their studying wasn't going to be impacted by talking to an independent researcher. So essentially, we asked them first to talk about what they think good feedback involves. We asked them to reflect a bit on whether they thought GenAI could be used to provide feedback, perhaps whether they were even using it themselves already to get feedback or help them with their written assessments. And then a kind of general discussions around what they think might be the pros or the cons of using GenAI to provide feedback on their written work. So what I'm going to do is share the findings in terms of basically what students were saying was positive about GenAI and what they felt was negative about GenAI, but also actually in doing so, they kind of also did that in the context of recognizing the limitations and the benefits of us, the humans, giving them feedback as well. So overall, they were actually really balanced about the potential benefits and drawbacks of, say, both tutors' feedback as well as the feedback that could be produced by GenAI. What did they say good feedback should be? So the most important thing that kept coming up was that, and all students said this in all focus groups and interviews, that feedback should help them to improve their work. So the students really wanted to know how can they get better. They wanted not just to know what was wrong or what they could improve about their work, but they also, some of them have said they wanted it to be to praise them and to motivate them to know what they'd done well as well. Students talked about needing good quality feedback, obviously, quality feedback they could understand, feedback that was consistent between their friends. So they wanted to know that the feedback that they were getting was similar in terms of the content or the length to their peers. They also said they wanted feedback to be accurate and detailed and very sort of specific to the assignment, so not too generic, but also personalised to their own writing and their own needs. So I don't think this is new, but this sets in context, this is what the students in the focus groups wanted from feedback. So I'm going to give you just some quotes from some of the things that students said in the interviews. And I'm going to first present what they thought the pros of GenAI might be, and then the limitations. So this student said, so it might be yours is the last one they look at. And actually they're so tired, it's obviously the tutor, and they need to go to bed or they need a coffee or whatever that might be by the time they get to yours. Whereas AI doesn't have that aspect. It's not going to get fatigued. It's going to be more accurate every time. So here you can see they're couching like the benefit of GenAI in terms of the kind of potential limitations of actually having a tutor giving them feedback. Another student said, I've actually found that GenAI can actually give individual feedback. So if you give like the rubric that's given for the coursework specifically, it can technically give you individual feedback. And this is what Jen and you were just saying about the students, wasn't it? That they've actually done this themselves. So we'd found that some students had done this. So it can give you individual feedback relevant to your work. It can also give you input on if it's like a first class or merit or pass. So generally, I think AI can give good feedback. Another student was, and this was a common theme as well, they're recognising, in line with us kind of getting tired, they also recognise that we sort of have emotions and feelings, and that our view of their piece of work might be biased because of the piece of work we've just marked. So one student saying that they could mark someone else's work 5 minutes earlier and think, you know what, I really enjoyed that because it resonated with me. And then they mark somebody else's work and they think, well, that didn't really connect. So the students, they're recognizing that we can be biased in our judgments and that is affected by what we've just read and the essays that have come before it. So really quite, realistic perceptions of the limitations of humans as markers here, I think, which is a fair and legitimate comment that the students are making. Because obviously GenAI, this wouldn't be an issue. Another student said, and again, this chimes with what Jen and you were saying in your talk just now, that having that sort of first draft looked over, and again, this initial submission, sort of having a ballpark of what you'll probably get for this would be great. So what they're saying is that you can do it as many times as you want before you actually submit it to the tutor. But this is the critical thing. They wanted a person at the end of the process who's accountable. So they want us to be there at the end. They want to know that they can check things over with us. If you're having a problem, they can come back to you. But an AI response wouldn't be the end of the world as long as there's this person, this human, their tutor at the end of the process as well, who's accountable, who can support them. Okay, so on to some of the limitations of GenAI. So they recognise that it's important that they knew that GenAI couldn't have that kind of context that was taking place in the classroom, and knowing that it didn't have the tutor expertise, it didn't know what they'd been told exactly. They also kind of recognised that tutors know their individual students to an extent, and that knowledge can give more meaningful feedback to individual students. And they didn't think that GenAI could give the same kind of in-depth feedback that the tutor could. And actually, this raised a really interesting point, because, and a few students raised this, that they kind of wanted the tutor to know that they were marking their work. So in other words, for the tutors not to be marking anonymously, because they felt that if the tutor knew who they were and knew what their needs were, the feedback could actually be more meaningful. Now, obviously, there are reasons why we mark anonymously, but in this context here, the whole value that the tutor was seen to bring to students was because we're not anonymous. We do have a relationship with students, and we do know, obviously depending on the size of our classes, we do know sometimes some more specific needs of individual students, and they recognise that GenAI couldn't do that, whereas tutors could. Another student said, maybe I'd be a bit fearful of what ChatGPT is looking for. Maybe there are things we discuss in class, there's a discussion that seemed important in class, and so I included it in the assignment, but ChatGPT might have a different approach and it would be undervalued. So again, it's that idea that GenAI doesn't know what's happened in the classroom, what's been said, what's been emphasised, and might not take that into account in feedback. Another student said, it's not through the eyes of the tutors who can synthesise everything, and they've set the questions, so they know what they're looking for specifically, and then they can see and make those judgments. Looking at your work, that's something that I feel GenAI just can't replicate. So it's this idea that the tutor is the expert who knows everything. They know what they've set, they know what they're looking for, they know what they've told students in the classroom. GenAI can't possibly know that. And then this is really the bottom line, and this is why I say it's a paradox. So students kind of recognise they potentially want feedback from GenAI, but they also don't, because they realise that it can't replicate that relationship that we have with them, which is really important. So this student's saying, I don't think you can replicate the relationship. If you're not sure, you can just go to them, your tutor. Can't do that with a computer. If it's completely AI created, then the tutor hasn't written it. So you can't have that follow-up conversation with them about, why did you say this, or what made you think that I could have done this better? Similarly, there's this thing about the human connection and students wanting to feel valued and to feel like the effort that they've put into writing their assignment is reflected in the effort that we're going to put into marking it. and that if we're just getting ChatGPT to give feedback or do marking, then that's not valuing the student's own effort. So this student said, when we know that ChatGPT is reading our work and responding to us, then that may lead some people to say, well, if we're not being valued, our work isn't really being looked into properly by a human. Why are we bothering drafting this all by ourselves? We can just ask ChatGPT. So effectively, they're saying, if it's going to be marked by ChatGPT, get ChatGPT to write it. What's the point in putting in the effort and the value if that's not going to be recognised by having a human giving that time and blood, sweat and tears in our marking marathons to look at it properly? And then the bottom line really is that I think this sentence, these two sentences sum it up really nicely. The student saying, this is a robot. I'm never going to be able to truly trust programming versus human connection. I think that's a really important takeaway, is that despite the potential advantages of using ChatGPT, and I think it can and should be used as a supplementary tool to help us and to help students, the bottom line is that they want that human connection with us. So yeah, as you said before, our jobs are safe. So just to summarise and finish then, students were really balanced in their perception of the pros and cons of feedback produced by GenAI, but also us as tutors. They could see some of the advantages of using GenAI to help them with understanding where they could improve in their work. But ultimately, that relationship they have with us is irreplaceable in helping them to learn and improve and understand what they're doing and how they can get better at it. Two other things did kind of emerge from the data. That students also said that if we are using GenAI tools to help give them feedback, it's really important that we're transparent. So, I mean, obviously one option is students submit their own work to GenAI tools and use those. We can help them with prompting and get feedback from those tools themselves. But if we're in a situation where staff are using GenAI to support them to write feedback for students' work, it's really important we're transparent in what we've used, why we've used it, how we've used it, because we're obviously asking them to be transparent in their use, so they would want equal transparency from us if we're using it to support the feedback process. And also, for all of us, we don't really know how GenAI actually works. We don't know exactly what it's doing, how it's doing it. It's essentially a very sophisticated predictive language text tool. And there's this bit of a black box problem in that we don't really know what it's doing or how. So yeah, I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much for listening. And it'd be really interesting to hear your comments and thoughts. Put things in the Padlet or the chat, and I'll try and respond to them. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Louise, for that wonderful talk. That was very interesting. We have got a couple of minutes for a quick question, but also you have a couple of questions in the chat if you wanted to take those, Louise, as well.
Yeah, let me just find them.
Whilst Louise is doing that, Phil, if you wanted to get your slides up ready to present in a couple of minutes, you're welcome to do that.
Right, Anna says, is it the case that an AI would come fresh to each piece of student work it encountered? Right, that's really interesting, Anna, and potentially not. What I've kind of found from my own kind of playing with GenAI tools is that they seem to give you responses based on what you've already been chatting to it about, and in ways that aren't fresh to each student piece of work. So actually, that's a really important point. Yeah, but again, there's this black box problem. You don't really know what it's doing or how it's doing it to give you your response. But that's a good question. So yeah, there could actually be order effects, as you say. Phil, you say you wonder if some of the comments suggest students don't always pay attention or know about moderation and second marking procedures. It's obviously not just the first marker's opinion. Yeah, potentially. Was there something more? Did you want to clarify what that related to?
No, it's just sometimes in the comments from students and the things you presented, it was a bit like we're talking about, well, the marker might be grumpy or the marker might not have had lunch yet or something like that. And it's just that idea of no one else checks the markers actually doing their job properly. And sometimes what we found over the last year is that students generally actually do want to hear a lot more about the moderation procedures just so it steps away from that. Their opinion versus our opinion type thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I think probably students aren't necessarily very aware of what checks and balances take place. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, just anecdotally on that, Phil, like I've done that with some students and they've typically respond really well when I say like, oh, it's not everything is second mark. I think like for our first year essays, they're not second marked, but like for dissertations and kind of stuff that's worth more typically has a second marker, and they're usually quite happy to hear that.
Yeah.
And it also takes a bit of pressure off me as well. I'm saying, oh, it's not just me, actually someone else marked this as well.